All right, back again. So the government's going to finally get involved a little bit here and there, mostly because it's by accident what happens on their shores. First, Amistad. Now, guys, if you do get a chance, the movie Amistad, oh, there it is, movie Amistad. It's probably better that direction. Oh, look, right there. The movie Amistad, great movie. Check it out. If you have not seen, I think it's 7 Years, 7 Years a Slave, another real good movie. The other one I might want to recommend here too is Roots, a lot longer, but they do a good job. I do know that there are certain pieces and parts on here that you can go to on YouTube if you want. Go to YouTube and go Roots and go to Slave Auction. You can go to a couple different scenes and stuff on there. They did a really good job. 1977, this was just a fantastic book, and then later on the series was just absolutely amazing. But the Amistad. A ship called the Amistad, 1839, shows up off the coast of New York. Our Coast Guard stops it, U.S. Navy stops it, and it is an absolute bloody mess. And this becomes huge. We get on there and we find dead bodies, we find blood everywhere, and we find these people speaking a language that we don't know. Speaking an African language, and they're trying to tell a story. We think it's a story of mutiny. What happens is we find, and it's easier to find a translator to speak Spanish, and there's only a couple that were left alive that were on the ship. The couple that were on there that spoke Spanish said that they were taken over by these Africans out of the Caribbean, and it was mutiny, and they've killed everybody else, and they should be executed. The United States said they have the right to in court. So it did go to the court in New York. These Africans stood trial. We actually were able to find an interpreter for them. They told their story. The Spanish told their story, and the lawyers worked this all out and figured it out. By the time it was all done, these Africans who were on trial for their life, for mutiny, for murder, everything that was going on, were actually found not guilty. That they were imprisoned from Africa, illegal African slave trade, brought through the Caribbean. Then that's where they took over before they were all sold out. And they actually ended up selling it in New York more or less by accident, but it saved their life. Be placed on a ship and brought back. But they were very, very close to losing their lives. Spain, of course, is not going to be happy with the United States. But you can see where they left from here, went down into the Caribbean, and they sailed out. The Spanish sailors were trying to tell them that, yeah, they're sailing back. But you can see they ended up right up here in New York. Great story, great history, great everything behind it. Especially the tales of actually them later on being free. Yes, we do have positive tales, like here. Okay, I have Equano. Equano was basically stolen as a child, sold into slavery. Later on, he's freed, and he tells the story of his life. Here you have his book, if you're looking for some great reading, good reading there, or like I mentioned earlier, To Be a Slave by Julius Lester. Second time something happens. An army doctor who owns a slave also owns his wife and their 2 children. Dred Scott, his wife Harriet, and their 2 children. Army doctor, just like Army and a lot of times military, are moved. Well, he was relocated from a southern state, which actually allowed slavery, to a northern state that did not allow slavery. Eventually what happens in 1857 is Dred Scott, you see here, people put money together and they helped him sue for freedom. The problem is the lower courts didn't know what to do with it, so it went all the way up to the Supreme Court. At the Supreme Court, Chief Justice Roger Brooke Taney. Chief Justice Taney went through and looked at the Constitution and had to try to figure out exactly what to do. Really didn't know, and so he said, well, what does the Constitution say about slaves? It says slaves count as 3/5 of a person. It's in the Constitution. Therefore, if they're 3/5 of a person, then therefore they're not a person. If they're not a person, they cannot be a citizen. Therefore, if they're not a citizen, they cannot use the courts to sue. If they cannot sue and they're not a person, they're not a citizen, then what exactly are they? Well, the doctor had a bill of sale for them. Therefore, by definition, they are not person, they are property. From this point on, this is going to really hit the United States, nonetheless hit the world hard. This goes back to the 3/5 compromise, going back to the Constitution when it was first written in 1787. Eventually, you'll see newspaper ads like this here in Boston, warning all people of color, beware of anybody, because they could actually take you think that you're mistaken for you, make you a slave, and sell you back down south. When we opened the African American Museum in Washington, D.C., this is what it looks like here. They did it based off of the 3/5 compromise. There are 2 layers in the basement down below and 3 layers up above. The 3/5 compromise. 2 layers below, 3 layers above. That idea of freedom. So now, the government is not willing to help and get rid of slavery. Slavery was supposed to decrease with the Missouri Compromise. It increased because of the Industrial Revolution from 700,000 slaves to over 4 million slaves. Southern states, the population keep increasing. Northern states have got rid of slavery. This United States is split. So we have the creation of what we call the Underground Railroad. That Underground Railroad, it's amazing. A system of basically safe places. A system basically for food, water, shelter, and also directions. But it has to be hidden, it has to be secret. It is ran by basically slaves who've ran away, ran by free blacks, ran by abolitionists. And we'll find these routes and roads all over the place. But it's a great way to fight this law that is called the Fugitive Slave Act. And thousands of people will be freed because of it. Look at all these routes, as you can see from here. These are routes going north, some even going south down into Mexico, where slavery is actually outlawed, down going into Indian territories, way down here, going way up even into Canada. There are a lot of routes, including places like in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. There are routes in hidden places all over the place. They had conductors, and they had their own languages. This you'll find in your textbook for what a station master is, or even a conductor like Harriet Tubman, who was a conductor. They had these safe houses with hidden passages and hidden rooms, like you see this hidden room here in bunkhouses. This had a trapdoor that went on throughout and dug on out so they could escape if actually a slave catcher came to try to capture them. Because all they'd do is just say, you were suspected, and come in. They had an automatic piece of paper that had got them around the Fourth Amendment, illegal search and seizure. So you had to know where to look for. Symbols, like candles in the window, safe places, quilts, maps, carvings on trees, different directions, songs that gave them directions, even like a phone tree. And they had a lot of people to help. Those people were free blacks. Those people were slaves. Those people who had run away before. And some of those messages were carved on trees. Some of those messages were basically here stitched onto a quilt, like Sweet Clara's quilt right here. If you notice that it is a map on here by a broken tree. You can see different places that are on here where corn is, other things that grow where they're free to go and get food. You can even find where there's a boat to help them escape across the river. The river you're trying to escape across is the Ohio River, which gets you into the north where it's free and you have more people helping you. Always looking for north, north, north. That north idea is actually the North Star. We can find it off of the Big Dipper. Here we even see the quilt, and quilts have different designs on them. My aunt, she's big into quilting. I doubt if she's making quilts like this. We also have a former teacher, Miss Jensen, who does a lot with quilting. She may know about some of this here and there because she did a little bit of history and a lot of English. If you came to these houses because you found like a candle in the window, or you found one of these quilts, you can come here and someone might give you food, give you water, even possibly give you shelter. Because that trek, you are trying to secretly move and secretly move and secretly move on through that. Now, for those of you looking for something to watch, I know it sounds corny, but Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Hunter, was great. And they actually run across a group of runaway slaves who are trying to flee north, and they're hiding in a church. You can see that. Anywhere you can hide, anywhere you can get to. But you had to look for those symbols. Here's where I really encourage you. To go onto YouTube, I want you to type in these words. Follow the drinking gourd. Normally I'd play the song for you in class. I should probably do it right now. It's on my iPod. I can figure that out in a second. Here it comes off this idea of the Big Dipper. With the Big Dipper, off the Big Dipper, you'll find the North Star called Polaris. This is your key. So what happens is with this song, if you can find this on YouTube called Follow the Drinking Gourd, you can find several different versions of it. Okay? And that idea of follow the drinking gourd becomes huge. When the sun comes back and the first quail calls, you follow the drinking gourd. For the old man is waiting to carry you to freedom if you follow the drinking gourd. Where the riverbank makes a very good road. The dead tree will show you the way. Left foot, peg foot, traveling on if you follow the drinking gourd. The river in between two hills, follow the drinking gourd. There's another river on the other side if you follow the drinking gourd. When the great river meets the little river, follow the drinking gourd, for the old man is waiting to carry you to freedom if you follow the drinking gourd. Follow the drinking gourd, follow to the north, movement north. Tells you to cross those rivers, and that big river being the Ohio River. Tells you to make sure that you move along the way and look for trees along the side. We know that moss grows on the north side of trees because that's where the sun least hits. So you look on the north side of trees and you might find a symbol, left foot, peg foot. So that you find a left footprint and then a dot next to it. This is from someone who has successfully used this and from someone who's actually ran. Well, he's ran and unfortunately he was caught. To make sure he didn't run again, his master cut off his right leg. That's why he has a peg foot, left foot, peg foot. Okay, traveling on. So you got to keep traveling on. These are things that are big. Here we have Harriet Tubman, which would be one of the great leaders or one of the great conductors of that. She helped many people along the way, including some of her own family members that were sold off into other property. I'm on my way to Canada, that cold and dreary land. The sad effects of slavery I can no longer stand. I've served my master all those days without a dime's reward, and now I'm forced to run away to flee the lashing board. Farewell, old master, don't think hard of me. I'm on my way to Canada where all slaves are free. We look at these different songs and we look at these different titles and stuff that are on there. But Harriet Tubman said it best. When I found I had crossed that line, I looked at my hands to see if I was the same person. There was such a glory over everything. The sun came like gold through the trees and over the fields, and I left. I felt like I was in heaven. She was not a different woman, but once she got over into the free territory, she knew she could be free. Because this map tells the whole understanding. Here, you can see populations of 50%, slave populations in these areas or more. Richmond, Virginia, where we had 2 slave revolts. Charleston, South Carolina, where we had another slave revolt. You have to get away. Anything you can do to move and move and move and move and get out. So looking for those symbols become big. Who are those people to help you? We know the name William Lloyd Garrison. Garrison wrote the newspaper Liberator. You should recognize this face, William Lloyd Garrison. But most of you guys go, we know that one from English. Yes. We know Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass will get a lot of help starting a newspaper called The North Star. Do you get it? They did those things. However, abolitionists had those newspapers. But here, Elijah Lovejoy, who ran an abolitionist newspaper, the people came to try to shut him down. They tried to break his press and try to do things like they did in other areas. He started shooting at them, so the only thing they did is they lit his house on fire. That's how drastic this is going to get. You should recognize this woman right here. This is Harriet Tubman, back with some people on the slave before she started to run away on that plantation. A letter to Harriet Tubman. You can find this. It's great. Frederick Douglass spoke wonderful words about Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman lived to be an old lady up into the 1900s, early 1900s. I want to say about 1913 is when she passed away. Here we have her shawl. We have a book. We have other things of Harriet Tubman in the African American Museum in Washington, D.C. And also here's stuff from Frederick Douglass. The picture, but we also have a book with Frederick Douglass there. Recognize anyone? You should. Harriet Tubman here. You should recognize Sarah Grimke and her husband here. This is the abolitionists. So the white folk who are trying to get as much as they can and get that information out there. And they brought slaves. Slaves that were runaways, slaves that were purchased, slaves like Frederick Douglass, a former slave, who bought his freedom and wrote a book. His autobiography would be huge. They had to tell their stories. And they told their stories by books. They told their stories by preaching. They told their stories in the newspapers. They told their story anywhere they could. Get the information out about the cruelty of slavery. And songs are huge. That idea of free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty we are free at last. Looking at the words of Dr. King in 1963. Those become those true meanings. Thank you guys. We'll meet again next week. Have a good day.